Hello, everyone, and welcome to In Contrast. My name is Alan.
And I'm Nisha.
And on this podcast, we talk about movies and the books that they're based on.
The catch is you watch the movie and I read the book, with a few exceptions.
Yes. And today we're going to be doing one that I think we're both quite excited for, Shutter Island.
Yes. It's a novel by Dennis Lehane, who's quite a prolific writer, actually. He also worked on The Wire, the TV show.
So I did not realize that.
Yeah, he's done all kinds of really cool stuff.
That makes sense, though.
If you don't know about Shutter Island, it is about a U.S. Marshal who goes to an isolated hospital for the criminally insane to investigate the disappearance of a patient.
Mm-hmm.
Lehane tried to combine gothic settings, B-movies, and pulp.
Yeah, that's how he put his inspiration for this story.
Yeah, and honestly, I think he nailed it.
Yeah, we'll obviously talk about how that worked in the book versus the movie, but it definitely felt like a nice blend of those styles. And it's a slight departure for him in terms of his normal style. Usually they're very straightforward crime thrillers. I highly doubt this will be the only Dennis Lehane novel that we discuss on this podcast.
No, this was the third in a trio of books turned into movies.
And very major films at that.
Yes. Yeah, and he's had more adaptations than just three.
Right,
but,
those are the big three.
Yeah, these are the big three.
Yeah, so the novel was written in 2003, and then we're also going to be talking about the one and only film adaptation, which was released in 2010. And that was directed by some guy named Martin Scorsese. Scorsese? I don't know. Some guy, anyway.
Our boy, Martin Scorsese. And I want to stop you right here.
Uh-huh.
This was the third time he was having a book adapted to film. A big deal, happened of the big deals, I should say. Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio together approached him and said, hey, we want to adapt your film. And Dennis Lehane was like, okay, cool. And then his wife was like, have you told any of your friends? And Dennis Lehane was like, I don't know. How do I tell my friends, hey, Scorsese is adapting? It's the third time. I watched a really wonderful interview with him from Lit Quake. And he's talking about how, he has friends who haven't even been published yet. Mm-hmm. How is he supposed to say, hey, Scorsese?
Look at all my success.
And Leonardo DiCaprio want to adapt his film. And so he didn't say anything. But one day he got an email from George Pelecanos, who's also a fellow author. He's actually had a pretty good career, it seems like, as well. He also worked on The Wire. The subject of the email was one word, Scorsese. The body of the email was 2 words. Fuck you.
Oh, wow. Well, feelings made very clear there, but understandable. I mean, that's a pretty big deal.
Yep. Yep. And I'm going to take that as that's how good their friendship is. You don't just send someone an email like that. So I think that's a great story.
And it seems like he was somewhat surprised that someone was interested in adapting this one. I don't know why. He was very successful already.
Yeah, he is an exceptionally modest man.
Yeah.
And honestly quite degrading of himself, I would say. So I think now that I've listened to an interview with him, I would be like, oh, I see why he didn't. He doesn't think any of his works will be adapted. He writes it and he's like, I hope someone likes it. And it's like, Dennis, a lot of people are going to like it.
Right. I mean, I only caught a very small portion of that interview that you were referring to, but it was basically just him going back and rereading something he had written years prior.
Yes.
And, just beating himself up. Every little line had something that he noticed that was wrong or,
he said
something in the writing.
Yeah, he said he got 3 pages in. It was because Ben Affleck, this was Gone Baby Gone, I think, was showing him who he wanted to cast for the roles. And Dennis Lehane did not remember any of his own characters. So Ben Affleck was like, it's a good book. You should read it. And then he tried to read it and he was like, can't do it.
Which seems like something that you can relate to a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I constantly forget my characters and their names and who they are. And you deal with so many, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And especially once you've written it and you can like let it go, like he's done. He doesn't have to go back to it.
Right.
So like why would he take up brain space trying to remember who all these people are?
Yeah, I mean, everyone has their own approaches, but to me, that's the sign of a good artist, that you're not dwelling on this one thing. I mean, it's one thing if you create like a whole world, you know, like a fantasy setting or something where you're making sub-stories within this larger thing that you've created, but not getting stuck on one straightforward story means that your mind is going to new places and you're trying to reinvent, and you're, you know, always not, you're not thinking you're hot shit, in other words, which is a good thing.
Yeah, like would be one thing if Tolkien was writing this big universe and then forgot who Gandalf was halfway through. You're in the middle of that universe.
Yeah.
You've been working on it for a long time, but you're in the middle of it. So stick to it.
Yeah.
But if you're not going to keep going with them, don't let them sit on your shoulder bugging you if you're not creating something out of it. Let them go.
Yeah, even if you're going to go back and like use it as a learning experience to say, this is how I've grown, this is how I can still grow as a writer. You know, there's a healthy level of that, and then there's an unhealthy level of beating yourself up too much. But yeah.
I would argue that, and he's quite funny, so it could be hyperbole, but he seemed to err on the unhealthy side. Like he's pretty hard on himself. But
at least he's not like dwelling on it.
No,
you know, he's just moving on.
Yeah, which is probably why it's a little bit of hyperbole.
Yes,
he just cracks a joke and moves on.
Right. Yeah. So, like you said, this you know, as we said, directed by Martin Scorsese, the film. Starring Leonardo DiCaprio, who had already collaborated a couple times with Scorsese at this point and would go on to do some more. We have a pretty stellar cast here. Mark Ruffalo is kind of his new partner that's joining him on the investigation. We have Ben Kingsley playing the head of the institution that they go to visit. Max von Sydow is another doctor at the institution. And we have Michelle Williams playing Leo's, you know, former wife. Let's put it that way.
Okay, yeah. It's a pretty all-star cast. Yeah. I think it was a pretty high-budget movie.
Yeah, I didn't see the exact budget.
Yeah, I think especially for Dennis Lehane's movies, it was one of the higher budget ones.
Yeah, there was a lot more going into kind of the psychological thriller aspect of it.
Yeah.
That I think could have bumped up the budget. And again, I mean, when you're dealing with all-star cast, I mean, many of these people could lead plenty of movies on their own. So, that tends to bump up the budget quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, you put Martin Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio's names like on the front of something, and you're probably going to make your budget back.
Yeah.
And they did.
Yeah, it made a pretty decent chunk of money.
It was a successful movie by objective metrics.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think it was for sure I didn't write down the, you know, exact placement on the list, but it was definitely in like Scorsese's top 5 most successful movies, you know, at least at the box office. On that same note, it is, although it has lived on pretty well, like it has retained its popularity quite a lot over the years. It's been 15 years since it came out. And, you know, I had said to you when we picked it that I was shocked to see it still like in the top 50, you know, most watched movies on Letterboxd. And it's, you know, you just see it pop up a lot still. And it's definitely, I think, one of those kind of, it's an easy introduction to kind of, you know, twist ending psychological horror. It's not even really horror, but thriller.
Yeah, thriller.
You know, that style of movie where things aren't quite what they seem. You know, which there's movies that go much more in depth with that kind of thing. But like, I remember that this came out when I was like 17. It was perfect for that, you know? Yeah.
I remember my friends being super obsessed with it, and it came out the same year as Inception,
right?
So there was this huge like Leonardo DiCaprio what does the ending mean movement going on.
Oh, we were all so insufferable.
Yeah. I honestly was not that deep into it, and now that I've read the book, I know what the ending means.
Yeah.
So it's not as deep as a lot of people think.
It's well constructed, in my opinion, at least the film version. I have not read this book, but it doesn't seem to deviate too much, although sometimes just the amount of pacing changes that are inherent in an adaptation can be ruinous. So you never know, even if it's kind of beat to beat the same, Might not work as well in one medium, but
Yeah, I have seen the movie back in 2015 or 2010 when it came out, and I was reading the book and I could like picture the movie the whole time.
Yeah.
It was like I was just watching the movie again, actually. A lot of the time. Again, it's been 15 years, so there were moments where I was like, okay. And I don't know that I always wanted to picture Teddy as Leonardo DiCaprio. Like, it's kind of fun to come up with your own picture
Sure.
of someone. But, you know, Leonardo DiCaprio's fine. So,
yeah, of course. And once you've seen it in one way like that, it's kind of hard not to picture it that way, especially if that was your introduction.
yeah. I also want to mention that the audiobook narrator, as everyone knows, I love listening to the audiobooks, is Tom Steck-Schulte, who also did No Country for Old Men.
Oh, right.
And as I said then, I am so sad he is no longer with us because I think he's a terrific audiobook narrator. There are a few moments I, might critique or whatever, but that's art. Art is hard to get perfect, if not impossible. But I think he's a really good audiobook narrator. I think he's done a bunch of Dennis Lehane. I think he's done a bunch of Cormac McCarthy. But I just want to give him another little shout out because I think he's really good, and I love listening to his books that he reads.
That's a good shout for sure. I've definitely seen his name come up with, I'm no expert in audiobook narrators, but I've certainly seen his name come up several times.
Yeah, he's done a lot. So anything from like Cormac McCarthy and Dennis Lehane are kind of the two big ones I would say that I saw. He's done a lot of like political stuff, historical stuff. So he's done a lot. I can see his name coming up a lot, especially if you're in those spheres.
Oh, and then another shout that we should probably give is that while this was directed and, obviously thought up by this team of Scorsese and Leo in terms of the interest to adapt it, it was not written by Scorsese. The screenplay was written by Lita Kalogridis. Yeah, okay. Who has done quite a few different scripts and adaptations over the years.
Oh, she does a lot of adaptations?
Oh, all sorts of different stuff.
Oh, okay. I will say I feel like adapting is probably a skill. So if you are an adapter, you've done multiple, usually, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and I would say that this... there's a lot to be said, and obviously we'll go in the details of that as we talk through it, but there's a lot of choices that, even though it sticks very closely to the actual story beats and how it introduces new information between the book and the movie, it does so in different ways. It does play to the strengths of the medium.
Okay.
To do things in a very visual way, in other words.
I would say the book is also very visual, so let's just jump right in because this is, I think, a good place to start. And I believe the book and the movie open exactly the same way, with Teddy vomiting his guts out in a boat. And immediately you're on this like foggy boat. The boat is foggy. The atmosphere is foggy. You're on this boat. You're coming up to this island. It's dingy. It's dark. It's like so just immediately sets the tone for the novel and the story, I should say. He just nails it. Immediately you know what you're getting into. There's no questions. You picked up a psychological thriller. You probably knew that. Sometimes books don't start the way they feel later. And that's okay. But in this one, especially given how it progresses, it is just so atmospheric from the get-go.
Yeah.
And, you're just seeing things like Teddy doesn't have his cigarettes and it's weird. And immediately he's also having these weird things happen to him. So we're from the beginning.
Yeah.
We've got tone, we've got atmosphere, we know the characters. We're starting in the middle of things on purpose, which it's called in medias res, I believe, where you start in the middle of action. Right. It's very, very risky. And the payoff in this book is actually perfect.
Yeah.
And he does it well.
Yeah.
He does it perfectly. And it's not action like the car blows up. It's action like he's on the boat. So it is mild action, but it is in medias res.
Yeah, absolutely. You're not seeing the whole setup of, okay, we've assigned you to this case and you're going to this island and here's your new partner and all this stuff. He, like you said, the very first thing you see is him just like completely discombobulated, being seasick. And then he kind of just goes out onto the boat and comes across his new partner Chuck, and it seems, at least in the movie, that this is like the very first second that they've met each other is right after this. So it's just complete distortion and discombobulation right from the start.
Yeah, and that's what they want you to feel.
Yeah,
it's perfect. They go on to get to the island, and that's where they learn about, they meet people, they have to give up their guns because it's for, people with mental disabilities who are like, criminally insane.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not safe to have guns.
Right.
So even though they're U.S. Marshals, they have to give up their guns, and they learn that a patient has gone missing. Or I think they already knew, but they start to learn more details.
That's the reason for why they were there. And of course, Teddy had his own reasons for accepting this case. But yes, it was known that was the reason that they were there.
Yeah. Does Teddy, I'm guessing in the movie, they wouldn't just say, like, he's on the boat, they get here, Rachel, and then he, like, turns to the camera and is like, and I have my own reasons. Like,
no.
I must take a little while to figure out he has his own reasons.
Yes. That's kind of like, as he starts to trust Chuck more, he starts to divulge some of this information about his personal life and, why he's there.
Yeah, that's exactly the same in the book.
Yeah.
Pretty quickly, they go to Rachel's room. So they go to the crime scene.
Yeah, so they get a little bit of a tour. They meet some of the guards. They start asking questions. They meet Dr. Cawley.
Yes.
Who, again, is played by Ben Kingsley in the movie and is the head of the institution.
Mm-hmm.
So it's unclear if the island is actually named Shutter Island in this story. I think that is the official name.
In the book, it's Shutter Island.
Okay.
Like, that's what it's called.
But the name of the institution that's on it is called Ashcliffe.
I didn't write down what the heck the institution is called.
I'm pretty sure it's the same in the book.
Yeah, it is Ashcliffe. There you go.
Just because they reference these different names, and it's sometimes unclear which one they're talking about, but just so for for reference, that is the name of the institution.
Yes.
But yeah, so they start immediately jumping in to investigate what has happened to Rachel. Mm-hmm. Obviously, they're very concerned because this is an island that's, very hard to get to. And, very rough waters all around it. We're dealing with what they assume to be a mentally deranged person.
Yeah.
That just was allowed to walk out the door, basically.
Yeah. So. I would say it feels like Alcatraz in Boston.
Yes. And so I also want to mention that this was based on Lehane's own experience of going to Long Island, not New York, but the one outside of Boston Harbor.
Okay.
Yeah. Long Island, Massachusetts, much smaller island. Also pretty hard to get to. In fact, I saw that within the past 2 decades, it has basically been completely closed off. Because the causeway and the bridge became too difficult to maintain and just too dangerous.
Yeah.
But it was, it had been used for many, many things over all the years, but it at some point most recently had been used for some different institutions for kind of rehabilitation. Not necessarily like an insane asylum, but, there were, places for people to go recover from alcoholism and things like that.
Oh, okay. So it was like a rehab.
Yeah.
Okay.
But Lehane had gone when he was a kid, I think sometime in the 70s, to this island, and it was during a major blizzard. So
oh my God. Yeah, that's spot on.
Part of the inspiration here.
Yeah, the movie and book majority takes place during a hurricane.
Yeah, a major hurricane, Hurricane Carol, which did run through that region in 1954, which is when this is set.
Yep. Yeah. August 25th, 1994 is when it started.
Mm-hmm.
I just had Wikipedia up so I could check that. Pretty cool.
Fantastic. Here is your New England history podcast.
I know. This is basically what this is going to be. So Teddy and Chuck, Teddy being our main character, Chuck, and I should say Teddy's full name is Edward Daniels, and the woman he's looking for is Rachel Solando, who was accused and I think found guilty of drowning her children.
Right. I have no idea why you feel like their full names are relevant to say at this point, but I guess we'll find out.
I feel like also most people who listen to this have seen or heard the movie.
Presumably so, but let's hold it till the end for fun.
They get to Rachel's room and there's like a code. I don't remember what the code is.
Yeah, so they find like kind of a note in the under the floorboard in her room, and it says the law of 4. Who is 67?
Yeah, and Teddy, being an expert code breaker, figures it out immediately, and everyone goes, "Wow, you're so smart!"
Does he in the book? He figures it out instantly.
Pretty fast, and he's like, "Who's the 67th patient?"
Right. Okay. Because in the movie they do kind of lead that out a little bit. It's not until a little bit later where he overhears them naming off how many people are in each ward, and then he puts it together. So it's just a little bit later, but I think it's just that he wasn't provided that information earlier.
Yeah. No, I think he like reads it, and he like it takes a couple pages, but he's like, "All right, how many patients do you have?" And they're like, 66, and he's like, 67. Who's your 67th patient?
Right.
So it's like so like he gets it so fast, which is funny because usually it's the other way where at the book they're like we can draw it out, and the movie they're like nope, gotta go.
Right. Yes. So I think it works both ways. It's not really like a crucial piece here. It's one of many things.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is also about the time in the book where we learn that Teddy wants to get revenge for his wife's death because she was murdered by a man named Andrew Ladis.
Right.
If you're not writing down the names, you should. Unless you know what's about to happen.
Right.
Who is supposed to be an inmate at Ashcliff. I will say a lot of this movie, and I think this might be one of the peak differences. A lot of this book, I'm sorry. One of the peak differences is that there's so many dream sequences. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of dream sequence, these weird dreams, violent dreams, like disturbing dreams. And you kind of learn some things from that. You learn bits of history, but then, we kind of learn Teddy's not a reliable narrator.
Right.
So there's this interesting, like every few chapters, there's like a dream sequence.
Yeah. And they do have a lot of those in the film as well.
Okay.
Yeah, they're scattered throughout, probably 5 or 6 different ones.
Okay.
And then they kind of bleed in and out of, quote unquote reality.
That's
through
exactly,
Teddy's eyes.
Yeah, that's exactly how they're written. Like a chapter will start with like, Teddy's walking through the field. And you're like, okay, yeah, he's walking through a field. And then you're like, why is his wife there?
Right.
Why does she have an axe in her head? And I can't, that's not actually what happens tonight, but it like, he builds it really well where you're like, oh, it's a dream.
Right. And ironically, given that you mentioned this is the same year as Inception, there is a scene where there are 2 layers of dreams that he wakes up from.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. It's like after he has one of his really bad episodes of what he thinks is migraines, he gets put in like the hospital ward basically. And he has this terrible nightmare about, some of the past things that we'll go on to talk about. And then he wakes up and then he sees Dolores again and then wakes up one more time.
Yeah. Okay, that's really interesting because I think I know the scene we're talking about. It's actually not too far after where we are. Mm-hmm. And he's talking to Crawley and Chuck. And then he starts getting these horrible, horrible migraines, which I also want to commend Dennis Lehane for his description of migraines. Mm-hmm. He gets some medication. He goes to sleep for a long time. And Crawley is blatantly like, you're going to be knocked out for a while, bud. But in the book, I don't think they do that dream within a dream thing.
Okay.
So I wonder if Leo...
he was like, I got this idea.
Like, hey, this really original idea I have.
Yeah, who knows? Absolutely. But it would totally make sense to be completely organic also.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just a funny thing, which I had not thought of until you mentioned that Inception was the same year.
I purposely looked that up because I think we're going to mention it a lot. Uh-huh. And I was like, when did they come out? I was like, it had to be a few years apart. No. Same year.
So, just a few other little notes throughout this section that, Teddy is absolutely perplexed, like basically how the patients there are being treated. He keeps wanting to call them prisoners. He keeps being corrected that they are patients. That is not how Dr. Cawley and the rest of the staff view them.
Yep.
Even though they are all violent offenders of some kind.
And they are there because of a court hearing.
Exactly.
They're not like, oh, you are a danger. You are like, some people you can intervene before a court order mandates.
No, this is because they have committed a violent crime.
Yeah, a court has ordered they're there.
Yes, but they do. But so this is very much, again, this is set in 1954. This is very much in that kind of interstition period between kind of the old ways of psychiatric medicine and coming into the more modern practice of actually trying to rehabilitate people.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk that Dr. Cawley does, talking about how the asylum used to be run and it was all torture and, basically just trying to subdue or otherwise like harm these patients.
Yeah.
But he believes in, true rehabilitation and therapy and these things.
Yeah. Cawley is kind of a huge advocate for things like cognitive behavioral therapy and like exposure response prevention and just all kinds of talk therapy.
Right.
He loves talk therapy. This 1954 is very early for talk therapy.
Yes.
1940s was about the time where like ethical, and I'm using air quotes, ethical psychiatry was becoming a thing. And that was also the peak of lobotomies.
Right.
By 1950s, I believe, Russia had outlawed lobotomies because they were cruel.
Right.
So I don't think the U.S. to this day has outlawed lobotomies.
No, I don't think so.
I do believe that it's by like medical practices and all the places that would use it. They say it's not a treatment option.
It's not being done, really. But
that being said, there are some places in the world where they still do like, it's not the same by any means, but there are some like severing of some things in the frontal lobe to mitigate certain things. They're not just putting an ice pick up to your eye and waving it around wildly anymore.
It's slightly more, if you would say, sophisticated. Not quite the right word to use, but there's a little more finesse to it now.
Yeah. Well,
but the reason behind it remains the same.
Yeah, absolutely. So I should have looked up when the last lobotomy in the United States was, but I think it was not that long ago.
No, it really wasn't. And I mean, there's even very famous examples of that happening to people in very high positions, such as the Kennedys.
Yes, the Kennedys have a great history with lobotomies.
Yeah.
I want to pause real quick because this is about the time where my favorite joke is told in the book.
Oh boy, okay.
How many therapists does it take to screw in a light bulb?
I don't know. How many?
8.
Why?
Don't overanalyze it.
Oh boy. Who gives that zinger?
I think it's Cawley.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's Cawley. It's a really good it's a really good joke. I love it.
That's pretty good. Yeah, so, again, throughout this period, they're noticing different things that end up coming into play later on. So, like, so Teddy is also asking all these questions. He wants to interview all these various staff members who were involved with Rachel.
Yep.
Wants to interview her doctor, who he has been told has now gone on vacation.
Yeah, Dr. Sheehan
is how they pronounce it in the movie.
Dr. Sheehan. Actually, and that's actually something right at the beginning. That's a huge point of contention, or at the beginning of the book, where they're like, "Oh yeah, you can interview almost everyone except for Dr. Sheehan,
her primary psychiatrist."
Yeah, and he's like, "You guys are on lockdown. Why would you let him leave?" And they were like, "I don't know. He could leave."
He literally in the movie, he's like, "I don't know. He's a doctor. Am I supposed to tell him no?"
In the book, it's even almost worse, where they're like, well, he's had this vacation planned for a really long time.
Yeah. Like, okay. Yeah, so he's just generally not getting a whole lot of helpful information from anyone. Everyone's a little standoffish, kind of weird towards him. No one wants to give any information. He is very much taking this as Dr. Cawley kind of telling everyone not to participate and help him.
Yeah, there's a scene in the book where he's interviewing patients with Chuck, and one woman gives him an answer that he just takes a note down and he writes rehearsed. And he's like, she described Rachel Solando exactly the same way as Cawley did.
Right, down to the exact verbiage.
Yeah, exactly. So you're definitely seeing like, oh, there is something potentially going on here.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in that same scene, I'm curious, in the book, does she also wait for Chuck to leave the table?
Yes, and she tells him to run.
Right, yeah, slips him a secret note to run.
Yeah, in the book, she just like writes it in his notes. But yeah, tells him to run.
And this is also the point where he starts asking all of these patients if they knew Andrew Ladies.
Yeah.
And that's the point where Chuck approaches him and is like, so who's this guy? You wanna fill me in here? Mm-hmm. And that's when he, regales to him that this is the man who was like a maintenance man in his old apartment building, and he believes burned down the apartment with his wife and children inside.
Does he have children in the movie?
Yeah.
Oh. In the book, he, quote unquote, does not have children.
Well, he has 2 children.
No.
At the start.
Nope.
He has 2 sons.
None. He does not think he has children.
Okay.
That's the thing. He and Dolores, right? Tried and wanted, but he keeps saying like, we never had kids. So yeah, the maintenance man burns down and kills her, and then he like gets off, and then he burns down something like a school and kills someone there. And he's like, it was the maintenance man.
Yeah, we'll definitely come back to the kids thing.
Yes.
But yes, there's an element of that. The reasoning is the same, but there is a certain element of that I find interesting in the film. But we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
And then also during this, he kind of goes out on the island, starts doing this, joining their kind of very lackluster search party where it's just the guards kind of standing around.
I'm gonna be honest, I don't think the guards even do any work in the book. They're like, we looked. Like that, you don't see them looking ever. They just tell him, like, yeah, we've been looking. We looked before you got here. That's why you're here, is because we looked.
Right. And he notices some things that catch his attention. Like there's some caves down by the water.
Yeah, we don't actually, the caves don't come into play until...
Okay.
That's interesting. There's like more foreshadowing.
Yeah, there's a little bit of foreshadowing there. And then he sees an old lighthouse that he's intrigued by.
Yeah, the lighthouse is a pretty big beacon.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't like that joke?
I did not. Okay. Yeah, no. Boo.
So I want to say here, I like to use Wikipedia as my plot go-to.
No.
They're missing like a big chunk of the middle of the book.
Yes, I noticed that too. It's like that on the movie too. If you read, at least in terms of the movie runtime, if you read the plot, about the halfway point of the plot synopsis leaves probably half an hour in the movie.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, this talks about that, like, there's potentially experiments, and then like, oh, now he's in the cave. That happens really far into the book.
Because ultimately, there's a lot of little things. This is where you're getting a lot of these little clues and things. Yeah. But ultimately, this is where you start to, I think, realize that the investigation itself does not matter.
Yeah, because they've also found Rachel Solando.
Well, hold on. Okay. So another character that's of some import is Dr. Naring. I assume he's also found in the book.
Yeah, I remember the name.
Oh boy. So there's this whole back and forth between him and Teddy, where again he's trying to pull information out of him. It seems more as though Dr. Naring is kind of using this as a psych evaluation for Teddy.
Yeah, I remember this.
Which greatly upsets him. And then this is where it really starts to pull in some of the political implications. Where, there's a lot of things dealing with Nazi experimentation in medicine.
Yep.
And then kind of like McCarthyism, Red Scare, communism stuff going on.
Yeah.
So that starts to flesh out as the story goes on. But this very first meeting with Dr. Naring very much implies that Teddy believes that he is an ex-Nazi, kind of medical investigator, whatever you want to call it, experimenter.
Yeah.
So he is obviously very upset at the implications of this, and this is what really seems to lead him down the path of they're experimenting on people.
Yeah.
To what end, I don't know, but something wrong is happening.
Yeah, because you can't be even vaguely German
in
1954.
This is also probably a good time to mention some of Teddy's past that we learn the earliest, which is that he definitely has tremendous PTSD.
Yeah.
As he was present for the liberation of the concentration camp at Dachau.
Yep.
So there are many, many visions of him seeing all the dead bodies frozen in the snow. He was part of the group that led the charge into there, so he saw that the commandant of Dachau tried to shoot himself and failed. So he watches him bleed out for about an hour, he says. And then among other things, and then should we give the final piece of that particular past? Or so we don't learn this straight away, but at some point later on we learn that part of Teddy's guilt comes from the fact that him and the rest of the men he were with, platoon, company, whatever it may have been, that liberated these people, they could clearly see that there was this understanding, like, again, the commandant tried to kill himself, like, they knew what was coming. They see all these dead bodies and starving people, and they decide, even when the guards of the camp surrender, the German guards, they shoot them all on sight.
Yeah. And it's like, he's talking about how, like, he killed these, like, young guys who just, like, didn't even know what they were doing.
Right, which there's many, many conversations to be had about the ethics and morality of something like that,
Yes.
If someone surrenders, does that automatically mean that you should, respect that? It's obviously a very hard thing to do in a setting like that when you see such horrible atrocities. And I mean, keeping in mind that this is something that no one knew was going on at this point.
Yeah.
No one knew until these camps got liberated. No one knew that was happening.
Yeah.
And it's completely unprecedented, at least in terms of modern history. So you can understand someone wanting to maybe exact revenge in that situation.
Yeah, especially when you've been through so much and you're so exhausted and you've seen your own guys get killed and all this stuff. Like, no matter what the correct responses, you're not thinking straight at that moment.
Yeah. So not to justify it or say that was the right call, but it's very understandable. Yeah.
Yes. And obviously he is very, very shaken by that. And he develops PTSD.
So again, we learn more and more about his past traumas, but we're starting from that point of him being a clearly very messed up war veteran of World War II.
Yeah, which I would say most of them were.
Yeah, especially in that situation.
There's not, if you were on like in the fighting, you were messed up. Yeah, that's just how that works.
Okay, so this is kind of the background. I mean, is there, now that we've like talked through some of these characters and stuff, is there anything else of note you feel like kind of sets up the characters?
I don't think so, and I think we're just like the book and the movie really do hit a lot of the same beats at similar points. So we are kind of just going through this together. Like I can't think of anything else right now.
Okay. How does Chuck act towards the beginning of the investigation?
He's like act like he's kind of a rookie cop, which is good for his character. And
well, is it? It makes sense for his character, but it's not exactly behavior you would expect from a trained U.S. Marshal. This isn't just some beat cop, This is a U.S. Marshal.
A U.S. Marshal. So and he talked about how he was from Seattle or whatever.
Right.
And like, I guess one of the big things to mention is when they give up their guns, Teddy is able to just like unholster it and hand it to the guy. And Chuck kind of like fumbles and has a little bit of trouble with the holster.
And just ends up, in the movie, at least ends up giving the entire holster rather than just taking the gun out.
That's really, really funny. No, he does manage to take the gun out. It's just he has a little bit of a fumble with it.
Right.
So that's kind of, and then after that, you just see Chuck being like very trusting and like encouraging and letting him lead and giving him space to explore things and question things. And, he encourages Teddy's distrust and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he's clearly letting him explore all of these possibilities, even the ones that don't seem to ostensibly make a lot of sense on paper. He still is like, we should investigate this.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
trying to hit every possible thing going through Teddy's mind, basically. And then how would you describe Dr. Colley during this portion?
He's also pretty good. I mean, there's things that like they're like, let us see all the patient records, and Colley's like, I don't think I can do that. And he says like, well, let me figure it out, basically. Let me see what I can do. So he is acting like he's trying to help, and
Right.
he is, being as useful as he can be with some limitations.
Sure. And Teddy very much does not understand these limitations.
No.
You know, there's some very funny scenes, which I think are amplified by how good Ben Kingsley is in general.
Yeah.
But he's just kind of like, so give me the papers. I need to see them. I need to talk to these people. And he's like, okay, well, we'll see what we can do. He's like, no, like, I am a federal officer, and this is a federal investigation, and you will give me these things. And he's like, maybe.
Yeah.
Yes, maybe.
Yeah,
we'll see.
It's very similar in the book where he keeps being like, let me talk to some people.
Yeah.
Let me see what I can do. But he's definitely being like, patient confidentiality. And you're like, okay,
It's
Colley.
really good. It's really good. And then also there's something kind of noteworthy. Again, I don't know if it like fully touches on this in the book, but there are some pretty telling lines and just kind of the way that Teddy talks about Rachel. He's absolutely perplexed how she can have the delusions that they describe, where and this is where we can get back to the fact that she has now shown up mysteriously.
Yes.
So they start, kind of talking to her, and it's clear that she's under this delusion that she is still married and has children and she's living at home.
Yeah, and they like play into that where she's like, I can't remember the exact roles, but it's like, oh, Dr. Colley is the milkman, and,
Right?
it's stuff like that, and
play
like
along with
this
it.
guy is the postal worker.
Yeah.
And so they're just like letting her live out her life like that.
And just earlier before that, not when they're interviewing her, but Teddy says, I don't understand, how is it possible that the truth doesn't get through to her? Like, she's in a mental institution. You'd think that would be something she would notice.
Yeah, but she's apparently not noticing.
Right. Yeah, so they kind of play into this, and she's talking about, he's basically like, what do you remember? What happened? And she's like, well, I woke up in the morning and I made breakfast for my husband Jim and the kids and sent them off on their way, and then
yeah, it's a very normal day.
Yeah, but basically. I went for a swim at the lake, is how she puts it.
Yeah.
And then they don't really delve into this at all, but she kind of confronts Teddy as though he is Jim, her husband.
Yeah, she thinks he's Jim, and she's getting like real frickin' cozy. And Teddy's like, I guess I'll play along. And then
he's kind of like looking around at everybody like, what am I supposed to do in this situation?
And then she like flips on him, and she's like, you're not Jim. And then she like starts screaming about how he was going to like rape her.
Okay.
So
yeah, they don't go quite that far in the movie, but it's essentially that there's like what seems like a moment of clarity for her, where she's like, wait, but my husband's dead. How can you be here?
Yeah. Yeah, she has that. Like the pieces are there.
They're just not quite fitting together.
Not fitting together.
And then Dr. Colley just claims that they had found her kind of wandering around by the lighthouse, which obviously triggers Teddy's suspicions even more.
Yeah. Teddy freaking loves that lighthouse.
He loves it. Maybe he should have just been a wiki,
A wiki?
Yeah.
And what does that mean?
The lighthouse keeper.
They're called wikis?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, you know what? That's what they should have done. They should have said, like, Teddy, you can go live at this lighthouse. You would love it.
Yeah.
And he probably would. I think somewhere around this time, there's another really good quote.
Okay.
Where they're trying to figure out why Teddy is so good at solving puzzles.
Okay.
Which, I'm going to be honest, some of them are not that difficult of puzzles. But
define the puzzles. What are you, like, just some of the
Like-
clues that are...
like the riddles that are being left out,
Okay.
and like the cryptic, like they're like anagrams and stuff like that
Right.
that are being like left out for him to find, and then he's like, well, I put it together, and I'm like, yeah, I could probably do that too, Teddy.
And they're just like sitting there like clapping like it's a 5-year-old that just learned how to do something
They're
new.
like, I didn't know the answer, but he says, I don't know. I do a lot of crosswords. I like puzzles. That's his answer to why he's good at solving puzzles at one point. It later does come out that he wanted to be a code breaker.
Oh, okay.
And there's this whole, like, he couldn't be a code breaker for certain reasons. I can't remember. But yeah, he likes crosswords.
Okay. Very interesting. They don't really talk at all about his puzzle solving abilities or him wanting to be a code breaker or any of that kind of stuff in the film.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, not really.
I don't think it offers a lot.
Yeah.
Like, it's cool and you learn, and I really should remember why he couldn't become a code breaker, but there's like a big reason why he was going to do it, and then they were like, no, you can't be a code breaker anymore. So he goes back into infantry. So,
well, I guess being a code breaker probably would have prevented all this from happening.
Yeah, probably.
'Cause I don't think any of this would have happened if he wasn't there to liberate Dachau.
Yeah, that's true. Have we hit the shaving scene? Does he have a shaving scene with Dolores in the movie?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Oh my gosh. You know this. I have a thing with blades.
Oh, yeah.
I don't like them. And I don't like watching people shave. There will be a Gillette ad on the TV, and I hate it.
Which you can handle it for yourself.
Yeah,
as long
for
as you're
myself.
in control of it.
Absolutely. But watching someone else shave, I can't. It's physically uncomfortable for me.
Yeah.
And this scene is, for someone like me, it was unbearable. I almost just kind of blazed through it and just skipped it. But he is shaving and then he cuts himself. And I was like, this is why I don't like blades.
Mm-hmm.
Screw you, Dennis Lehane.
That does tend to happen, yes.
It was so, and it's one, like, you know, he shouldn't be shaving. She's asking him not to leave the house. I think it's a dream or a memory.
Right.
She's begging him not to leave the house. It's quite a crass scene at times even, but the tension is rising. He's getting upset. She won't leave him alone. And then he cuts himself. And it's like, you know, it was going to happen. So it was so painful for me. Yeah. But I think it's a really well-crafted scene. And I think for like the craft of writing, it's a really good scene that you could learn a lot from, of like building tension and not, I'm going to get into writing craft. When you have two characters talking, the worst thing you can do is have them do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
You need them to be doing something.
Right.
Very rarely they can be doing nothing, but there should be a reason for that. And this is the perfect illustration. He could have been doing anything. He could have been building a birdhouse and slammed his thumb. You know, there's so many things he could have done. But the shaving, it's because there is danger involved, and it's also a benign, realistic activity. It builds that tension, and we feel the tension through his shaving and through him absorbing things in the world and experiencing things. And then he cuts himself. And we could have been like, they have this conversation, and he was mad.
Right. But that shows that he's lost control of himself in some way. He's distracted. Yes. He's upset.
Yes, exactly. He's so upset he cuts himself doing something he does every single day.
Which, it's not like that idea has not been done many, many times, but it's always effective, really. There's very few cases where that kind of rising emotional state while you're shaving does not end badly, and it always has that, like, you know it's coming and you just start to tense up.
Yeah, and I will say there are a lot of things you could think of like that. Like, think about a scene where someone's getting really upset and they're listening to a conversation and they're pouring everyone tea. You know that teapot's going to hit the floor. Mm-hmm. You're just waiting for it to happen, you know, or anything like that, really.
Yeah.
I really liked their conversations about the war in this story and how traumatic it is for men, and how few resources they have. And these guys are really struggling, and it really, I think, makes it okay for people to struggle. Like, look at this guy who did these amazing things. He was a huge part of freeing Dachau, and this is like Manly Man.
Mm-hmm.
And even he is having his struggles.
Right.
Even he is still dealing with the after effects of all of this stuff. And people want him to get help.
Yeah.
They like say that. They say, I would rather, I think it's Collie, says, I would rather know that you are alive somewhere when you leave here than dead. Right. So please let me give you some contacts that you can talk to.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought it was cool how they talked about like mental health and the war and like the realities of it.
No, it's obviously a big part of it. And I also felt like that was handled pretty deftly in the film as well, mm-hmm. where you get this idea that it's like, I mean, it's always that, the victors, make history. They're the ones that write history, right?
Yeah.
And so there's just this, kind of never-ending idea that all of these men that went and liberated these camps are heroes. And like in many ways they are, but then they also committed war crimes, you know? And it's like, yeah, you can say one is worse than the other, sure. Just on a level of scale, that's certainly true. But like, Teddy doesn't feel like a hero.
No.
He's clearly very racked with guilt, and his conscience does not let him feel like a hero because it's never that simple.
No, and you talk to basically any veteran who's been in the line of action, and they're not like it's very rare that they'll be like, and I killed people and it was great. Like, even you hear someone say that and you're like, you have something wrong with you.
Right.
You are repressing something.
Exactly. They're either full of shit or they are completely repressing something.
Yeah. There's trauma that they're trying to uncover and heal from, or it's absolutely.
Yeah, no, that's something that a lot of people just don't seem to understand when it comes to this like military hero worship, is that the people who have really been through the shit, they don't feel that way about it.
They don't. Yeah, they absolutely don't. Even if they liberated a concentration camp,
an objectively good thing.
Yeah.
There's still an asterisk.
Yeah, there is. There is. This might also, since we're talking kind of about the portrayal of people and things like that, I was really curious about how the patients were treated, because that's sort of a big part of the first half of the book. Like we say, they're not prisoners, they're patients. Mm-hmm. And Collie is very insistent about that. Yeah. These are not prisoners, these are patients. And they, talk about the value of like moving forward in medicine, finding better, more effective treatments. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was really wonderful how they treated the patients. And obviously there are some moments where it skews into the stereotype of like, this patient's a little bit scary. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the time it's not that. These people have done something and they are treated with like humanity and dignity and care.
Right.
Almost through the entire book by the staff.
Well, even the moments where, this person is scary, that's through Teddy's eyes.
Yes.
And he is distrustful of these people. He even makes a comment to Dr. Collie about why should they be given this opportunity to reform when they have done such horrible things.
Yes.
Which obviously he's trying to come to terms with his own issues about, like, does he even feel, he doesn't feel like a hero. Does he even feel like he deserves a second chance? Or, this is something he's racking in his brain, but it's presented at that time as just that's who he is as a person. He doesn't believe in that treatment of people like that.
Yeah.
So it's obviously much more complicated than just that. But yeah, so any of that stuff that you're seeing is really through his eyes, and he is, as you said, unreliable.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the general treatment is quite well. He's obviously distrustful of it. At first, before he starts to delve into what he thinks is going on, he acts like it's just, a waste of time or energy or money or whatever. And then, as time goes on, he sort of starts to think of it more as a front for what's really happening. But yeah, you see a lot of scenes of just like people outside. There's this big nice garden in front of the main building, and they're always outside kind of tending to the flowers or doing this and that, and it seems quite peaceful. And as you sort of mentioned, Dr. Colley very much believes in this rehabilitation and giving people as many chances as they need. But he also does recognize that sometimes people are just beyond help, and at that point he thinks it's just about making life as comfortable as possible for them to live without pain.
Yeah, and balancing the like safety and comfort kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah, I think there's one point where like a patient shows to be like truly dangerous to someone. He attacks a guard, but they're able to get him under control, and like the guard is like gonna beat this guy up. So it like even flips the script that like the one time that the patient is scary and dangerous, he's not the most dangerous thing there, Right. And it's just I feel really passionate about how when we write stories about mental institutes, so often it's patients are scary.
Right.
The patients are crazy. They're going to kill you. And this is not like that.
No.
And this is 2010. So this is pretty early for that break of narrative.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really cool. And it's cool to see that they did that also in the movie and they held true to that.
Yeah. And again, it's so indicative of the actual history of the time that this is taking place in, where that this was a somewhat revolutionary idea at the time, that comes with some level of distrust.
Yeah, yeah. And doctors, like the real doctors who were like Colley and stuff, are super important to revolutionizing medicine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But there's, again, this is where it pulls in a lot of this political subtext, where it's just general paranoia, especially again, like people are so on edge about communism and their involvement with the Communist Party and all this Joseph McCarthy bullshit, that it's just like there's this huge distrust of government, especially when it comes to health.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of fears of mind control and different, all these different things. And this is clearly something that Teddy is struggling with, because he saw some of the atrocities committed by the Nazis, and then also, has this general paranoia that's kind of swept the nation at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's sort of that mind control is what becomes Teddy's fixation around the point that we're talking about anyway, is he starts, they start talking about stuff like LSD and things like how they alter things. And they're like, well, what if we can medicate these patients and turn them into like a army of mind control?
Yeah, he basically feels like they're going to release all these people onto the world to go commit heinous acts or something.
Yeah.
Which it's like, it's somewhat hard to follow the logic of it in the film, at least, but that's of course very much on purpose, because it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Because it's his delusions.
Yeah, well, that's also this is the big turning point where you're like, something is going on, and I don't know that Teddy is reliable. They are playing a game with him.
But you still have this slight distrust of what's happening. Like, what is their end goal of it? You know that they're messing with him.
Yeah.
You know it's not a straightforward investigation.
Yes.
You start to doubt Teddy.
Yes.
But you still doubt everyone else, too.
Yeah, there's a point where you don't trust anyone, basically. And you're trying to figure out who to trust. And you're like, well, Teddy has these wild ideas that they're going to take these patients and brainwash them with medication and make them an army.
Yeah.
Like, that's way out of
it's just wild. But it's like, at the same time, this is what I'm saying about like the unprecedented nature of these concentration camps and things.
Yeah.
People didn't think people were capable of stuff like that. I mean, like, we've done fucked up stuff all throughout history, but like this was a new level of just savagery.
Yeah.
Just calculated savagery.
Yeah. And this is also the point. Rachel Solando has just shown up, and they're like, okay, your investigation's over.
Yeah, like, she's fine. She's here. What do you mean?
And it's just like, well, that's really convenient. That's weird.
Yeah.
And there's just still unanswered questions.
Right. But as you said, this is a major turning point in the story. This is really like, if you had to pick one exact moment where it really flips from like kind of hard-boiled detective neo-noir kind of thing to full-on psychological thriller, this is it. Yeah, because this is really where you feel like
figuring out this Rachel and trying to find Rachel, and then wait, what? Something else.
Yeah. I mean, and there's also the element of him like kind of more and more losing his identity, at least in his own mind, you know?
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's things like, I mean, it's a slow, gradual thing, but at this point, it's hard to distinguish him from just another patient.
Yeah.
At this point, you know, especially in the movie, there's lots of like visual things that make you feel that way. And I mean, I could just like name off all the different clues that it gives you throughout the story, but like he keeps taking pills because he's having all these migraines.
Uh-huh.
He has, you know, obviously, like you said, had to surrender his weapon.
Yep.
He at some point has to change clothes because his get wet and things, and so I think they give him like the hospital staff.
Yeah,
clothing.
he gets in the book. It's the orderlies. Clothes.
Yeah, but still, like, you know, he is slowly assimilating more and more into just being part of the institution than an outsider. You know?
Yeah, especially given that he doesn't have anything to do anymore.
Right. Yeah.
You know, you're just here, but there's a hurricane,
Right.
so
So
you
you can't
can't
go
leave.
anywhere.
You're stuck here.
Yeah.
Yeah. He doesn't actually take pills throughout the book, except for that one time.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
He just kind of lets his migraines get really bad.
Oh, okay.
But they do point out, you've been eating the food, you've been drinking the coffee, you've been smoking their cigarettes.
Right.
So
You should be distrustful of all of that.
yeah.
But yeah, so this is, you know, after the whole thing with Rachel, everything is supposedly A-okay now.
Yeah. They are like super calm about it. Yeah.
Yeah. This is where Teddy's kind of like physiological symptoms start to really go off the rails.
Mm-hmm.
He has more and more terrible migraines. They're kind of like completely debilitating him at this point. You know, he doesn't have a whole lot of control over his physical body at this point.
Yeah, he's really struggling, and he's also getting more and more paranoid.
Mm-hmm. And he's having more and more visions.
Yes.
And this is kind of where that scene happens that I mentioned, where there's the two levels of the dream.
Mm-hmm.
You know, clearly reality is starting to blur more and more.
Yeah, in the book we get that through Dolores speaking to him
Mm-hmm.
and saying things.
It's
and like
generally the same in the movie.
Yeah. And it's really naturally inserted in there that you sometimes almost forget that she's not supposed to be there.
Right.
But she is all
Right.
of a sudden.
Yeah, some of it, again, is like clear dream logic, you know, where
Yeah.
he's going from, you know, seeing bodies at Dachau to turning and seeing, you know, a fire, you know, of his apartment burning down or whatever. He sees Andrew Ladies and tries to confront him. And then he disappears and he sees Rachel standing there over the bodies of her drowned children and all these different things. Like they're just kind of, you know, blending all together at this point in his mind.
Yep.
And then he wakes up and he still sees Dolores like walk through the door casually as though she's supposed to be there. Everything else about the room is the same as reality, but Dolores is there.
Yeah. Yeah, and she seems to be kind of the one thing that gets to go between dream and real.
Right. So, you know, after all this, it's basically like the aftermath of the storm.
Yeah, they're doing a lot of cleanup.
Yeah, there's just like tree limbs everywhere and things are broken and the generator has gone out.
Yes.
So they don't have power at this point.
Yes, and this is the perfect time for Teddy and Chuck to go to Ward C, which is the third ward with the most violent patients.
Right. So this is where we see a quite stark difference in how the patients are treated. This looks much more like a dank, dark, dungeony prison than it does, you know, the nice flower garden outside.
Yeah. But these are exactly like, so in the book what's happening is there's a guy who's like running around with the key, unlocking doors and letting people out.
Right.
And this is where the guard gets attacked. And so you're seeing that like when these people get out, it is dangerous.
Yeah.
So they're basically playing this game of catch up, and Chuck and Teddy are like in orderly's clothes conveniently go and say that they're going to help and they're going to clear the roof and stuff like that. And they split up to find information on Andrew Latis.
Yes, so this is the point where he is completely just focused on trying to find Latis. At least in the movie, it's after that last interaction with Dolores, she basically is like, you have to kill him. You have to find him and you have to kill Latis.
Wow.
So that's what sends him off on that next day.
Yeah. I think in the book, he keeps apologizing to Dolores about not being able to do these things or struggling to do these things or wanting to do these things. I don't think she ever tells him to kill him.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Interesting.
But yeah, so this is where we meet George Noyce.
Yes.
And Teddy is speaking to this guy who's basically like, they're playing with you. It's a game. And he's all beat up.
Mm-hmm.
And George Noyce is like, you said you'd get me out of here. You said this would all be done. And Teddy is like, I'm telling you, I'm working on it. I'm trying to get you out of here. There's a long history here with, George knowing secrets and stuff, supposedly. And Teddy asks, like, who did this to you? Who beat you up? And George Noyce is like, you did. It's your fault.
Mm-hmm. Yep, so he's been, like, locked away in this thing, and that's one of the more interesting parts, I think, is that, like, it doesn't try to hide the fact that Teddy recognizes him. He knows who he is, but there's something that he can't quite piece together about it.
Yeah.
And obviously George is acting as though they have this long history together. So, you see Teddy kind of trying to work it out, like, okay, I must know this guy from off the island, but he never really comes to any conclusion about where he knows him from.
Oh, yeah, he has there's quite a big story of how, like, George was there, and then he got out of Ashcliff, and then went to prison again, and was again sent back to Ashcliff, even though he was complaining about, like, all these things that were happening, which are very much in line with what Teddy believes is happening. Right. And they're saying he was sent back to Ashcliff to silence him.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, they do tend to hit all of those same points, at least, like, in his ramblings. He mentions a lot of that stuff. It's just, like, not entirely clear how it's supposed to fit in the reality that Teddy has constructed for us.
Yeah.
So I found that quite interesting. But yeah, so he goes on about how he is, can't trust anyone and is, trying to be taken advantage of or all these things, and basically is just like, you have to forget about Dolores.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's saying stuff about they're playing a game. I think he says game in the book. He says game a few times, and I think that really, really stands out.
Right. And he also, confirms to Teddy, like, they are definitely experimenting on people in the lighthouse, and I think it was implying that he had been in there before or something,
Yeah, I think in the book they don't really imply that, because the lighthouse is kind of one of those you go in and don't come out. But yeah, he's also on Team Lighthouse is weird.
Right. And then this is where he also is the one that kind of plants the seed of distrust between Teddy and Chuck, where he's just like, who is this guy? He just showed up and you just believe that he's your partner now?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And so he's basically, his mind is just set on, I need to go get to this lighthouse, and I don't know if I can trust even Chuck anymore.
In the book, he's constantly like, nah, Chuck's my partner. He's a U.S. Marshal. Like, he really fights for Chuck the whole time.
Really? Not even a seed of doubt?
I mean, I think there are moments where he's like, well, it's weird that he's, like, new, or, like, he tries to be like, do you know this guy? I think he got transferred out to Seattle while you were there. But through all of it, he's like, no, Chuck is a U.S. Marshal. Like, even when he tries to prove to himself that Chuck is not a U.S. Marshal, he still comes back to being like, no, I'm wrong. This is, he's the one person I can trust.
Right.
So.
Well, it doesn't change a whole lot, but it's because it is a very small kind of subplot in the film,
Yeah. Oh, this is also in the book where George Noyce is like, have you ever been alone?
Right, away from Chuck, right?
Anyone.
From anyone.
Have you ever been alone?
Right, and that's the kind of thing that it's pretty easy as the viewer to have come to this conclusion at this point, but where, I mean, Chuck does not leave him alone. He's always there, and he's coming at it from a supportive angle.
Yeah.
But it really is just like, you're not going to be out of my sight.
But during this conversation, Teddy does not have Chuck.
Right.
So Teddy again is thinking, well, I'm alone right now. Like, I guess I haven't really been alone.
Yeah.
But I'm alone right now. So you're wrong.
Right.
you're wrong about Chuck.
Yeah, this is probably the element that makes the least amount of sense to me in the story and in the movie specifically. I see why they did it for what we're about to talk about, but it's, why he would, because he does still defend him, but then becomes like aggressively distrustful of him at the same time.
Okay, that's really interesting. I wouldn't say aggressively distrustful. I would just say there are a few moments where he's like, I'm gonna ask him something. I'm gonna try to like needle him a little.
So my question is, what was the point of them leaving him in the ward alone?
I'm going to tell you, there were so many things that they did that I'm like, why would you do that?
Right.
How does that help your end goal?
Well, I'm curious to hear what some of the other ones are for you, but that was the one that stuck out to me that I just didn't understand. Because everything else kind of comes together for me by the end, but that particular point I didn't understand, unless they wanted him to think he was having this conversation with George.
I guess, and I guess I'm just going to go ahead and spoil the ending right now. But,
Are you?
Well, yes, because George Noyce says, it was you who beat me up.
Right.
He doesn't say it was you who beat me up, but he says it was you.
Yeah.
When did Teddy beat up George Noyce? We've been with him through this whole story.
Right. And at this point, at least in the reality of Teddy, he's like, this guy's just crazy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's blaming me. He doesn't even know me.
Yeah. So that's kind of the one thing I can come up with, is that they thought that seeing George maybe would be like, I beat this guy up, or like George would be like, you beat me up, and he would be like, I beat you up.
Which he clearly doesn't have that realization straight away, but he does. I guess he does kind of retroactively have it later.
Much later.
We'll get to that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so at this point, he is heading to the lighthouse. He's got to go check out the lighthouse.
Yeah, basically, he and Chuck split up because Chuck doesn't. He's like, it's raining. I'm done. And again, Teddy's like, I'm alone.
So this is the point where it's quite different, and that there's the quote unquote reasoning for him being distrustful is Chuck wants to come with him.
Oh.
He's still like having that like desperate, like, I have to be with you all the time.
Okay.
Of course, dressing it up as, I'm your partner, I want to be there for you, blah, blah, blah. But this is where, Teddy really puts his foot down, and he's like, where did you say you're from again? Portland or whatever. He's like testing him.
He does that so much throughout the book. And every time Chuck is like,
no,
Seattle.
I told you this.
From Seattle. And it's like, Teddy, you're not going to get him on Portland versus Seattle.
You failed the one time. I think he's got this one.
He does it so many
I think
times.
he's got that backstory.
I got to the point where I was like, Chuck's probably actually from Seattle. They picked Seattle because he's from Seattle. Stop, Teddy.
But basically, he's just like, look, like, so Chuck joins him part of the way and leaves them on this. He basically is like, I gotta go alone. You're staying here. He like pushes him. It's very aggressive, and is like, I'm going to the lighthouse, and you're staying here. You're not coming. But they're like on this cliff top kind of thing.
Okay.
So he goes down to the lighthouse, and he realizes the tide is too high and he can't get to it. So he comes back to the top of the cliff, and he sees Chuck smoking cigarette by the edge of the cliff. And he looks down and thinks he sees his body lying there lifeless. So he climbs down the rocks and realizes it was just a rock that looked like his body.
Yeah.
And then this is, I think, where it joins back up to what happens in the book.
Yeah, because that is very different. And this is probably the most we've seen it stray.
Yeah.
In that Chuck, like I said, is like, I'm not doing this. It is raining. I want to go home. I want to go sit in front of a fire.
Mm-hmm.
And so, also at this time, Chuck had Andrew Latis's file. And that Teddy goes for a walk. He's trying to get to the lighthouse. He sees a cliff. He looks down, he sees like a piece of paper, and then he sees what appears to be Chuck's lifeless body.
Mm-hmm.
Climbs down. Oh, it's not Chuck. Better get that piece of paper. He puts the piece of paper in his pocket without looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, he's like, okay, well, now I guess I want to go to the lighthouse.
Okay. Yeah. So it gets you to the same point, just slightly different ways of doing it. Mm-hmm. I have to feel like that was just to add like a little more conflict, or a little more of him, like, you think maybe that he could possibly be coming to some sort of realization that matters. He's on the right track, perhaps. I don't know. But it's also, I think, at the same time, if you're paying even the slightest bit of attention, drawing more attention to the fact that Chuck won't leave him alone.
Yeah.
Voluntarily.
Yeah. Which is interesting right after Chuck leaves him alone.
Right, it is, yeah. So I don't know that that's my favorite part of the movie. But
So is this where he meets
yes.
Rachel Solando 2.0?
Yes, so after he climbs down the rocks, he looks up and sees like a little firelight coming out of this little cove in the side of the cliff. And climbs in there to find Rachel Solando.
2.0.
2.0. The real Rachel Solando.
In quotation marks.
Right.
So we learn the first Rachel Solando was not real.
Right.
The second Rachel Solando in the cave is apparently a woman who is a psychiatrist at the hospital who is like, they're experimenting. You're not safe here. She's the one who says, you've been eating their food. You've been drinking their coffee. You've been smoking their cigarettes. And she's like, don't trust them. Is she real or a figment of his imagination? Or like what?
Figment.
She's
for
a figment?
Sure.
Okay, because I
Is that not clear in the book?
Well, it could be just me. Because also keep in mind, I was reading this with the terrible migraine.
Mm-hmm.
She says all this stuff, and I was like, so why would they have this woman pose as a psychiatrist in a cave? How is she? This is where I was really like, I don't understand what these psychiatrists are trying to get.
Right, I see. No, my understanding is that, I mean, just to put a big spoiler right here, Rachel does not exist in any way, shape, or form in reality.
Yeah, okay.
They had an actual person pretending to be her at the institution, that the Rachel that came back. But
in the institution, it is a real person.
Okay.
There are other people interacting with her. At the end of the story, it is confirmed she is a real person as well.
But she's not Rachel Solando.
She's not Rachel Solando. She's someone else acting as a patient named Rachel Solando.
Right.
I guess I should put this together now that I know the ending, that of course he would make up the Rachel Solando in the cave because her name is Rachel Solando.
Mm-hmm.
Which we will get to. Anyway, so yes, she does all that. She explains all this stuff to him. He goes back to the hospital before going to the lighthouse. And he's like, where's my partner? And people are like, who?
You don't have a partner.
You don't have a partner.
Chuck who?
Who's Chuck? Who's Chuck?
Who's Chuck?
Who's Chuck? And then he talks to like an orderly who is like, here's how I'd get out of here if I was running away. Which I don't, again, understand why you would do that and give him information to get off the rock if you don't want him to get off the rock.
Yeah. I don't know.
Does that happen in the movie?
It does. Yeah. I didn't really think through it at all, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's just to make the illusion seem real to him, or the illusion of choice.
But this is the point where they're starting to say, you don't have a partner.
Mm-hmm.
So why are they also saying, well, maybe you should get off the rock?
Well, because I think that they want to disarm him.
Okay.
By saying, you're free to leave. Dr. Colley's like, you should get on the ferry tomorrow and forget about it. Chuck who? What are you talking about? Like, You're free to go. Just go.
Okay.
But they know that he's going to look for Chuck because that's who he is as a person.
Yeah, and that's something that's really great about Teddy is that he's like, I'm not leaving my partner behind who I think is dead and being experimented on.
Yeah, exactly. He thinks that this is just their way of trying to cover it up, that he has now been captured and experimented on, and so he's not going to have any part of that. So again, I think it's just giving him the illusion of choice.
Yeah. So he goes on the run to get to the lighthouse, which involves blowing up Colley's car.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad they included that in the movie.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that was that was the one thing I cared about. I was like, please tell me he blows up the car in the movie.
Oh, yeah, he blows up the car.
Which I also want to say, like, where do you need the car on the island?
I don't know.
He's walking to the lighthouse. He runs like 3 circles around the whole island in the time it takes for you to find
and
him.
That kind of stuff is, I questioned it, but then I think I found it to be purposeful disorientation. because the island seems both really small and really big at different times. It seems like they are trekking all across creation to get to the lighthouse sometimes, and then other time it's like the ferry is a stone throw away from the institution.
Yeah, they're like, it's right there, a little bit rocky, but it's right there.
So I do think that's purposeful, to disorient.
I mean, I'm also thinking that, like, I guess his other option is leave his car parked in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, if he can bring his car with him, I guess I would just bring it.
This is again, Ben Kingsley gets these fun little things that add just the slightest touch of humor, where he's like, here we are. This is the final culmination of everything. You blew up my car. Yeah. I loved that car. Why did you blow up my car?
That's exactly in the book. And Dennis Lehane has a very good balance of humor and drama. And he does that where he's like, I really loved that car.
Yeah.
Why did you have to blow up the car?
He's just like, this is the one thing that has clearly not gone to plan. That was the wrench that he didn't expect.
And when he says this, well, okay, let me just get there. Because he blows up the car. He's running around. They're trying to find him. They manage to, like, corral him to the lighthouse. And in the process, he knocks out 2 guards. And he gets into the lighthouse. It's all drama. He's sneaking in. He's got a rifle.
Mm-hmm.
And he opens the door. And he's in the top of the lighthouse, which not really how lighthouses work, but whatever. Gets in the lighthouse.
Yeah, where was the
beacon?
Yeah.
They literally get into what appears to be an attic in the movie. Yeah. Like in the book, you can at least be like, I don't know, there's a ladder somewhere.
Right.
But so he gets up there and Collie's like, surprise! And this is when he's like, well, you knocked out 2 guards. Are they okay?
Right.
And he's like, Teddy's like, yeah, they're fine. And then he's like, okay, so my car.
Yeah, he's like threatening them with the gun, and he's like, that's empty, by the way.
Yeah.
Also, how badly did you hurt the guard?
But he's most upset about the car.
But the car? Why would you do this?
Yeah, and this is where they go on, and it is a exceedingly dramatic scene where Edward, what's his last name? Daniels. And Rachel Solando are written out on this big sheet, which is exactly the same in the movie. Mm-hmm. And then there's arrows pointing to it and says Andrew Latis and Dolores. What's her last name?
Oh, shoot. I don't remember.
Chanel.
Chanel. Yeah.
Chanel. It's literally right in front of me. Dolores Chanel. And Collie's like, look at it. They're anagrams. And I was like, bro, you like crosswords?
You couldn't figure this out?
You couldn't look at this for 2 seconds and be like, that's an anagram, Mr. Codebreaker?
My man's is not getting good scores on the New York Times spelling bee.
He is not. But you know what? Neither am I.
Yeah.
So this is where we get like the big reveal.
Yeah, this is like the investigator, the detective has gathered everyone in the room for the unveiling of the crime kind of situation.
Which is a trope that I hate.
Do you?
Yes.
Oh, I love it.
I don't like it outside of Sherlock Holmes. And I will say, it works in this in a sense.
It does.
Because Teddy is an unreliable narrator.
Right.
And if you haven't figured it out at this point from all we've been talking about, Teddy is Andrew Latis. He is a patient at the institution. Yes. And they are trying to play a fantasy for him to see if it will break him out of the fantasy.
They're trying to make him explore every last bit of his theories in real time.
Yeah.
To prove to himself that none of it is real.
Yeah.
And hopefully break him out of his delusion.
Yes. And so it works again in this book because your narrator is unreliable and the detective, quote unquote, who's doing the big reveal is someone else also.
Right.
It works in Sherlock Holmes because you're from Watson's perspective.
Right.
Just think.
It doesn't always work. I always find it like a funny trope because it's usually happening in movies that I'm not taking too seriously.
Yes.
But yeah, in this case, I do think it works quite well.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And we see, Teddy's wrestling with the truth, and then Collie gives him his old gun back, and he's like, that's your gun, isn't it? Isn't that the gun you gave us at the beginning? Look, it has your initials. Do you recognize the gun? He says it like 12 times. And then Teddy is like, yeah, I recognize the gun. And Collie's like, okay, take it and shoot me if you want. Shoot me and leave. And then it's quite a tense moment. And then he does shoot Collie in the face with water.
Yep.
There is nothing in the gun but water. And then Collie's like, all right, send him up on an intercom.
Mm-hmm.
And up comes Dr. Sheehan, who we have known as Chuck.
My
Dun, dun,
God.
dun.
Who could have seen this coming?
Which is when Teddy's like, yeah, you couldn't get your gun out of the holster. I should have known.
He really knew deep down all along, but
this is also where the therapy takes like a hard, like unhinged turn, and they're just like screaming at Teddy. They're like, please remember.
wake up.
Yeah, they're like trying to beat it out of him at this point and trying to make him
Clearly, our new methods aren't working. We're going to resort to violence again.
Yeah, exactly. And this was the whole point, was to like save the institution, and they failed miserably. And this is where the story lost me.
Oh.
In the last 3 chapters.
Oh, no.
The story lost me because they info dump everything.
Yes.
And that is just not how you do it.
It is a lot of information.
Yeah.
I could very much see that not working as well on the page as it does in the movie.
Yeah, so I think in the movie you kind of like are able to be like, look at all these pieces we gave you and look how they suddenly fit in pieces.
Right,
together.
like you have all these visual clues in your head that are coming together at this point.
Yeah, in the book, it's sort of like, okay, you had 3 kids. You never thought you had 3 kids. I guess we saw you dream about the kids sometimes, but we were never really led to believe that you had 3 kids.
Mm-hmm.
Your wife didn't die in a fire. She murdered your 3 kids.
Yep.
You murdered your wife. And it's like, this is all new information at the end of the story. It is too late.
Yeah.
You cannot give me this information now.
See,
you have to find a different way to do it.
This is, I've pointed out some different ways where I think that narratively the film like tried to spoon feed you too much and it made it weaker. But I think that adding him believing that he had 2 children gives it a strength in this case.
Yeah.
Because he is viewing these 2 kids as, oh, they died in a fire, right?
Yeah.
And then he's seeing these 3 children, including a daughter, when he sees all these visions of Rachel having drowned her children, which of course he thinks is completely unrelated, right?
Yes.
And so it's not until this point where he doesn't ever deny having the children. He denied having this 3rd youngest daughter.
Okay, yeah.
And so it pieces together where it's like, oh, well, that's why he's having visions of these children, because they were his,
Yeah.
And it makes more sense where he tuned out part of it, but not all of it. And it was like having the kids die was a driving force for him.
Yeah.
But it obviously was not the full picture in his mind.
Yeah. Something else that I think was a poor choice is that the daughter's name is Rachel.
Yes.
And I'm like, give her a different name.
Yeah.
You got this whole story about Rachel Solando. We keep coming back to Rachel Solando. Do not name the daughter Rachel unless she is Rachel Solando. And she's not.
Yeah.
We have 2 Rachel Solandos we meet. We don't need a 3rd Rachel.
I mean, obviously he has created Rachel Solando in his mind, That's not their invention, it's his.
Yeah.
So that's why. But
well, no, Rachel Solando is his invention.
No, I know. That's what I said.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Right. So it's not like they're arbitrarily naming, you know what I mean. But it's very clear that he has forgotten about or blocked out the fact that he had this daughter.
Yeah.
And chosen to give her name to someone else.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess that makes more sense in the novel, is that like the Rachel he actually knew doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it just lost me there. I was like, these are too many. And the fact that it's like 2 long chapters of wrapping up and explaining all of this tells me that it wasn't woven throughout enough. Yeah. And one of the chapters is literally like jumping back to when he finds the kids dead and explaining like his whole backstory with his wife.
And again, that's all in the movie. I just think that visually it works better because you're seeing these same elements that have been present in his flashbacks throughout.
Yeah.
You're seeing them come together into reality.
Yeah, it's like they've laid the puzzle pieces out, and then they're showing you how to put them together if you haven't yet.
And it's just a really well put together scene. In
Yeah.
fact, like the music that they choose, it's the only time that there is, which I haven't even mentioned, but music is a huge part of this movie. Not even just in the normal ways. Like it's somewhat like it's clearly using it to set an emotional tone, but like in a subversive way.
Yeah.
Which works really, really well. But this scene is the only time where there's like calming music.
Okay, that's interesting.
Which obviously, kind of goes against what's actually happening. But it's, yeah, I don't know. I found it really worked well.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. I like that. But yeah, I really I got into the book and I was like, I'm going to love this. And then I got to those last few chapters and I was like, oh God, dang it.
Well, that's a shame. Yeah. Cause it really is like the obviously like crucial moment of the story. Right.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you enjoyed it up to that point, at least.
Yeah, more or less. I did enjoy it. And I think I knew the ending and I was just sort of like, you need to foreshadow more. Like I knew there were moments that needed a little bit more. Also,
where it's not just handing it all to you on a platter at the end, you're like figuring it out.
Yeah,
because that's more fun.
Yeah, well, also because when you do an ending where you have to dump all this information, it's also not satisfying because you're like, so then why did I read all of this if it's something else?
Sure.
And like, yes, unreliable narrator, it can still be like a satisfying ending where we're like, oh my gosh, that's right, we're putting the pieces together. So I just,
well, I am curious, how do they expressly spell it out? Is it like in Teddy's mind he's remembering?
Yeah, so what happens is they take him to the lighthouse or something. I can't remember where they take him, but they inject him with something. He recognizes the nurse as the woman who played Rachel Solando 1.0.
Right.
And he then like kind of drifts off and he just recalls everything in what is one of the longest chapters of the book. No, you can't have it be that long. You just can't.
Because,
it's like he's finally accepting things. You're seeing him and he's like, and I'm Andrew Latis. And he's putting these pieces together. And then he like goes to sleep and you live out the memory with him.
Okay.
Which goes all the way back to like when they first met and how when was a sign of depression I should have known about. This was a sign of paranoia I should have known about. I was ignoring these things.
Right. And that's ultimately the point of this section is to, I mean, obviously it's a big reveal about what reality really is, but emotionally the point of it is for him, it's bringing out the blame that he lays on himself for not paying attention to Dolores.
Yes.
Because she very clearly had like these telegraphed cries for help.
Yep.
And he was not either noticing them or taking them seriously or not, because he was dealing with his own problems. Like he had a drinking problem. He clearly had untreated PTSD from Dachau.
Yeah.
And so it was just sort of going by the wayside. So like the way it comes together, I think is quite good, but maybe not how it's presented.
Yeah. I think they also talk about how, and this was something I really liked, that they kept like saying like she needs to go see a psychiatrist. And then she was not going and seeing a psychiatrist because that was for quote unquote crazy people.
Right. Which again ties back to this antiquated view versus the modern view that this is happening in between.
Exactly. And in the end, it's kind of their own undoing that she didn't get the help she needs. And it ends terribly for the children and
everybody.
Her. And Teddy, who's actually Andrew. And so we get this big info dump. And then we get the little bow on the end, which
Well, hold on. Let's just spell it out one more time, just to make sure we're all on the same page here.
Okay.
So Andrew Ladies is the only person. There is no Teddy Daniels.
There is no Teddy Daniels.
There is no Rachel Solando.
There is no.
There is only Dolores.
Yep.
His former wife. Here's an interesting point of deviation, actually.
Okay.
In the book, there's no fire at all.
No.
It's purely imagined by Teddy/Andrew.
Yeah.
As a cover-up for the reality of what happened.
Yeah.
In the movie, there actually was a fire.
Okay.
And basically all that happened was that it's basically being used as another sign of Dolores not being fit or like well,
Oh, maybe that.
It was a point of, either negligence or she was in some form of psychosis or something. But this is something that's clearly being painted as a warning sign that Teddy ignored.
Yeah.
Because the building did burn down, but it was Dolores's fault. But they all survived and got away and moved to the lake house.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I don't think that's in the book.
It's not. I know for a fact.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And I think something like that, maybe having some more realizations like that are, because in the book, if there's no fire, it's sort of like, so where did the fire come from? Right. But I like that.
Yeah, I don't mind it either. And obviously these things are representative throughout the movie, like especially when you trace it back in your head. Anytime he's thinking of the fire, he's having these visions of the fire, dreams of the fire. This is him going towards regression. Mm-hmm. And any time where he's thinking of water and drowning and these things, this is him coming closer to understanding reality.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, so I think that having a literal fire to like base the story off of makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. It means that was already another traumatic event. Just because no one died does not make that not a very traumatic event.
Yep. That
he again ignored the realities of and moved them somewhere else, and then the inevitable happened.
Yes. Where, again, Dolores kills the 3 children by drowning.
She drowns them in the lake. She, I think, had taken a lot of the medication she was supposed to be on.
Yes, laudanum.
Yeah, it was supposed to not be administered or by her directly, but Andrew had left
the bottle out
on a trip and left it out, and she took a bunch and murdered the kids.
Yep. And then he has quite a long breakdown and then murders her.
Right. Yeah, so he kind of cries and holds her. She's basically acting like nothing's wrong. She says some very disturbing things about like, oh, we can take them in and dry them off and they can be our like dolls to play with, and just very, very disturbing things.
Yeah. She says really weird stuff. And he's telling her to stop talking.
Yeah. And he shoots her.
Yep. So now is where we get into what is effectively an epilogue.
Yeah.
Where, and this is what every high schooler loved in 2010. Did he know? Was he going to the lighthouse? Where was he? In the book, he, being the narrator, begins referring to himself as Teddy.
Right.
Again, and approaches Dr. Sheehan. Sheen. And is like, all right, what's our next step, Chuck? Mm-hmm. And they're like, give me a sec. And then he walks over to some other doctors, and then they walk away. And like there's like a mention of like a tool wrapped in some paper or cloth or something glinting. And he's like, we're going to go to the lighthouse.
Yeah. So
and then that's
clearly they were hoping it would break him out of this cycle. Dr. Colley also mentioned that he had pretty much come snap to reality about 9 months prior to this whole thing, but then had fully regressed back. And that he's, he basically sees him like reliving this same cycle over and over. Yeah. And that he was hoping that this would be that extra step to pull him out of it completely. Yeah. So this is obviously like the last little test interview to see if it stuck this time. And it seems as though it did not. And so he's taken to be lobotomized now.
Yeah. And I think even in this article, it says that it's, unsure if he has regressed or can't deal with the grief and is choosing to have a lobotomy.
Right.
But I think the fact that it is from his perspective, basically, and he is again being referred to as Teddy, indicates he has regressed.
Yes. So that is the clear ambiguity of the ending.
Yeah.
Here it is purposefully designed to be questioned. Mm-hmm. I don't know that Lehane even has an answer.
I mean, why would he use the name Teddy if he's not regressing?
Well, because, again, he might not want to face the reality, and he wants to be lobotomized. He knows what's happening. That's the question that's happening here.
Yeah.
So this is the somewhat famous thing in the movie that deviates, is that they add a specific line in the film that really brings this to light.
Okay.
Which is right after he says, like, what's our next move, Chuck? He says, which would be worse, to live as a monster or to die as a good man?
Yeah.
And so this is the clear line that points the film more towards he knows exactly what he's doing, and he just cannot live as this man any longer. He cannot deal with the truth.
Yeah.
Even though he's been forced to reckon with it directly, he can't live like that.
Yeah.
He's choosing to be lobotomized.
Okay.
To live a different life.
All right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I certainly don't think that was the explicit intent of Lehane's novel.
Yeah.
And his ending, I think he designed it specifically to be questionable and it could go either way. But that is the two options that are being presented.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the two options that you get.
Yeah.
I don't really think that there are any other that we can come up with.
No, of course not. But yeah, so it's still ambiguous, but I think the film definitely leads you more to believing that he is aware of what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Something I think is cool about Dennis Lehane that kind of ties in well with the movie, not to like totally change subjects, but he used to work as a therapeutic counselor.
Okay.
For children with like disabilities or who had been through trauma.
Huh.
So this is not actually a world he's unfamiliar with.
Right. Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. It's actually not easy to find about him unless you watch that Litquake interview. So, and everywhere I looked, it was just like one sentence about it. But so he did used to do that. And so I think, he's definitely pulling from his own experience and knowledge.
Yeah, that's really interesting. But yeah, so those are the main like big things I would say. That the fire really existed and that extra line at the end are probably the two most crucial differences between the two formats.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe also yelling at Chuck and telling him to go away.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not as big.
I don't think it changes as much. Again, it kind of leads to the same place, just in a different way.
Yeah, that's true.
But it is, I don't know. That to me is just a change that didn't need to happen. I don't know that I feel like it added or took away anything. It just was different.
Yeah, definitely. And sometimes you just try something different because maybe it'll work better, or maybe it would not have worked as well the other way. But we don't know that because we can't see the movie with a different different thing.
But yeah, so again, like a lot of interesting stuff happening stylistically here.
Yeah.
Just I think it does a really, really good job of blending those styles that we mentioned at the start.
Yeah, the gothic pulp.
Yeah.
Noir, was it? Yeah.
All of it. It was a little splash of all sorts of things,
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, and I appreciate the way that the film dealt with it. I didn't remember this until I went and rewatched it, but there's things that, like, if you're not thinking about it, come across as like technical mistakes.
Oh, okay.
There's like some somewhat questionable like CGI effects and things.
Huh.
But it's really, I think, done on purpose to, again, disorient and like kind of bleed reality from Teddy's mind.
Yeah.
And then, there's even points where I had to rewind several times because I was like, am I actually seeing this correctly? There's a point where Dr. Colley is walking down the hallway, and you see his mouth move when he's a certain way when he's saying the name of a medication, but you're hearing something different. It's ADR.
Oh, interesting.
And I think that that's on purpose. I don't think that was just sloppy ADR. I think it's that Teddy is hearing what he wants to hear.
Yeah, we're talking about Martin Scorsese in a huge budget movie. That's
mistakes
not something
like that.
Yeah.
No. And then there was the one that really got me that I had never noticed before, and then I did end up looking it up and confirming that it was a purposeful choice because I was so curious, was that woman that the patient that they're interviewing that slips him the note.
Yes.
She gets a glass of water from Chuck. That's how she distracts him to go off so she can slip him the note. And when he comes back, she takes the glass, and then you see her hand come up to her mouth, but there's nothing in it. It's as if she's holding a glass, but there's no glass in her hand.
Interesting.
And then she sets it back down, and you see the glass empty on the table.
Oh.
But I had to rewind that like 4 times because I was like, is there really not a glass in her hand?
That's wild.
It freaked me out.
Yeah.
Like I thought I was going crazy. And then I was like, oh, wait, that's the point.
Yeah.
You know, so it just has these like really interesting flares like that.
That's really cool. And I love watching things and catching those little production errors. Most of the time people don't see them and they don't take them out, and that's fine. But like honestly, one of the most recent ones I've noticed was in The Office. They do the interviews with the characters throughout the story. And they're like interviewing Pam, and she's wearing one outfit. And then in the story, she changes her clothes. And then they cut back to an interview with her where she's talking about what happened with changing the clothes. And she's in the old set of clothes.
Yeah.
So they forgot to change, or they didn't, so it's just stuff like that is kind of interesting, but clearly there's also a use for those quote unquote mistakes.
It's not something I ever would have picked up on when I first watched the movie all those years ago.
Yeah.
But now it's really interesting to see. And sometimes it is totally unintentional, especially TV. I feel like TV is,
and when you're making so many episodes,
just because it's a tighter schedule and stuff. It's Starbucks cups and Game of Thrones finales and things.
That's okay. That is significantly worse than forgetting to change clothes.
It is.
Yeah. That is
that was on purpose. Starbucks paid them a lot of money for that.
We can also be like, Pam recorded it later. She, whatever. Like we can fiction it away somehow. But like that, no, you can't have that. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
But anyway, this, I think, just the structure of this story and how we went through it, I think we were able to hit on all the things. It kind of, introduces you these themes very, straightforwardly in some ways. It's not buried under a ton of stuff.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like they're trying to be like purposefully obtuse or obscure, I guess is better.
But at the same time, I definitely think that there are things that are subtle enough that they could be missed just because there's so much going on. Not to say this is like some, absolutely mind-blowing, like, holy fuck, how did that happen story, but it's well done and it's well crafted.
Yeah. Yeah, it is clearly, and it's not like... And I will say, for complaining about the info dump at the end, it's not like it didn't make sense.
No, it makes sense. It's just, is that the most interesting way to...
Yeah, is that satisfying?
Because they could have done just a very simple, I don't know how you bleed the actual flashback of what actually happened with the kids in there, but like it would be very easy just to have him stating as part of his like post-interview thing of like, my name is Andrew Ladies. I know that I killed my wife. I know that she killed my children. That kind of thing. Where you can state it overtly, but without it taking up 3 chapters and just being an info dump.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that would make it make sense in the context of the story, but I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have anything else you want to add?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that there's a lot to this that even I didn't pick up on or, don't know enough about to, and we touched on some of the political implications, but I think there's probably a lot more that could be delved into there.
Yeah. Dennis Lehane has, he doesn't typically love, he does like using his work as like a political statement and having it mirror like modern issues, but himself is very outspoken politically, but also has said that like he doesn't necessarily want to make huge political statements in his novels.
Right.
He's making pretty big statements about go get some freaking help in this book.
And that's, that's totally fair. But again, it's a lot of times, as we've discussed many times, author intent is only part of the puzzle.
Yep.
So you can certainly find things within it, whether it was intentional or not.
Yeah.
I mean, I certainly had my mind thinking a lot about our modern, the way we consume information and things like that, that it's easy to disguise reality and subvert it. And, especially with all the misinformation on the internet and stuff, that's very much tied to this like truth versus lie, exploration that's done in this story.
Yeah.
So there's certainly something there. Again, I didn't, fully go into thoughts and some complete analysis of it, but there's certainly something there. And then this is just something that I don't know enough about to have any kind of educated opinion on. But if it's something that interests you, like I said, the music that was chosen for the film was very purposeful and very designed. And so I can see as a viewer, like, okay, it's setting me up, like a lot of it's very atonal and discordant and all these things. So you know what effect it's having on you as a viewer. But I think historically there's also a lot of significance to some of the choices that were made.
Okay.
That I just don't know enough about classical music history to delve into or feel confident about. But if that's something that is of interest to you, I think it's something worth exploring.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's really cool. Yeah. All right, then.
I think that's all I got.
So what do we think? Is the book better than the movie?
I don't know.
I don't think we have a consensus. I guess for me, the one thing I would say is that ending with the prolonged explanation really took me out. And it sounds like the ending of the movie with its explanation did not take you out of the story.
No, I mean, you could, if someone was like, I rolled my eyes at that because it was obvious and then it over-explained it.
Yeah.
I could see that, but it doesn't have that same, like, I mean, what you're describing to me sounds like it's like a total just like cut off of the, kind of momentum of the story.
I mean, the story's, there's no momentum anymore because it's solved.
Done, but you have to follow that through to the very end.
Yeah, and it's like, this is the wrap up and it's going really long. I mean, and it's a lot of stuff that that
sounds more like you're reading an analysis of it after the fact than part of the story itself. You know what I mean? Like there's a level of like, you just don't have to be that obvious with it.
Yeah.
So I feel like someone could complain about that with the movie. I just don't feel like it was quite as like abrupt and noticeable.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we're going to give it to the movie.
But it would be like a real tight race.
It's like, really, really tight. And again, this book, like the atmosphere and everything was really, really good. There were just a few points that kind of were sticking points for me that kind of kept it from being like a perfect novel, which again, really hard to do if not impossible.
Sure. I am very curious to see where ultimately this will land for you in like all of Lehane's novels. Because again, it's a bigger swing for him, but it, maybe that portion of it is because it's not necessarily his strong suit of the type of genre to be writing in. I don't know.
Yeah.
So we'll see how some of the others do. But I mean, I love this movie. I think it's great. I don't think it's flawless, but it's like middle of the road for Martin Scorsese. Which is,
it's a great movie for Martin Scorsese. It's okay.
Just okay. And that's kind of we didn't talk too much about the general reception of it, but it's like, again, it's lived on very much and people still very much love it, but it critically like kind of just middle of the road for him. Yeah.
I mean, but it's like it's a fun movie.
Great movie.
So
really good. Really interesting to watch. Like there's no point where you're bored or even when you know what's happening, there's enough little things to pick up on still.
That's good.
That it's like, it invites a rewatch for sure.
Yeah, and I was never bored in the book either. I just, except for maybe the ending. Well, I think that about sums up our thoughts. But before we sign off, Alan.
What you got?
It's time for a game.
A game?
A game.
A different game?
Nope, it's the tagline quiz. I even thought about doing something else. I can't remember what it was though. Are you ready?
I don't know. You're playing games with me. You're trying to mess with my head. Who are you?
Who am I? We should have figured out anagrams of our names.
Oh yeah, we didn't do that.
That would have been a good idea. Anyway, don't worry. He runs. He spins. He kicks evil butt.
That's Sonic the Hedgehog.
Yup.
Obviously.
2024 animal adventure.
So this is 3 specifically.
Yes.
Okay.
Jim Carrey, Ben Schwartz, and Keanu Reeves.
Oh, yeah.
Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Sonic, Knuckles, and Tails reunite against a powerful adversary, Shadow, a mysterious villain with powers unlike anything they have faced before. With their abilities outmatched, Team Sonic must seek out an unlikely alliance.
Not a movie I've seen.
Yeah,
I haven't seen any of the Sonic movies, actually. I have nothing against them. I think Jim Carrey is quite funny as Dr. Robotnik.
And you know what? When people complained about Sonic in the first one, and they were like, what the heck have you done to this CGI? They fixed him.
They did. They listened.
They listened.
They did not release the nightmare fuel.
They did not. And I am so proud of them for doing that.
I constantly see those comparisons side by sides, and I'm just like, oh, thank God. Like, there are very few instances these days where I feel like we're on the right timeline.
But that's one of them. That's one of them. Sonic the Hedgehog retcon. Well, it's not even a retcon.
Man, I've been killing it on these, huh?
Yeah, you have.
I mean,
I think so.
You haven't been giving me super hard ones. But.
No. Well, and I'm going to be honest. I kind of forgot until just now that I was supposed to do this. And I was like, oh, which is one that I can do? And I just picked one.
I want to complain and tell you to do better, but I'm afraid of the consequences.
Yeah, I did Wild Women of Wongo, so I'll go down that road.
Well, knowing you, I should have known that one, but still.
Yeah, you should have. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening to In Contrast. I'm Nisha.
And I'm Alan.
Don't forget to comment, rate, and subscribe. It really helps us out. You can find us at In Contrast Pod on Instagram and Blue Sky. Next up, we will rate, review, and talk about The Orient Express by Agatha Christie.
Sticking with the mysteries.
Yes. Super excited about that.
Yeah.
We will see you all next time, where we will ask the important question, is the book really better than the movie?
Bye-bye.